There's a pivotal moment in every human life when something unseen determines the fate of entire generations. It's not a grand event, nor an unexpected inheritance, or a stroke of luck. It's a silent decision, forged in the depths of one's own mind, when no one is watching. Many never recognize this moment. Others feel it as a persistent unease in their chest, as if something whispers, "Your story doesn't have to end where it began." And it's precisely at this juncture that a family's first truly wealthy individual emerges. Not with money in hand, but with an act of inner courage. Have you ever felt it? That strange intuition that your life could be so much more than it currently appears? That quiet doubt that surfaces when you survey your reality and wonder, is this truly all there is for me? For years, I've observed men and women who toiled their entire lives simply to survive. Honest, diligent people, yet they carried in their eyes a kind of weary resignation. They feared money, feared failure, feared trying, feared criticism, feared appearing arrogant, feared stepping outside the confines of where everyone else remained. Fear often masquerades as prudence, but deep down it's merely a refusal to grow. Most people don't fail due to a lack of ability. They fail because they never truly dared to believe they could succeed. The first true wealth one needs to acquire isn't found in their pocket. It resides in their mind. For no one truly achieves what deep down they believe they don't deserve. A family's first wealthy individual invariably breaks an invisible pattern. They shatter the silent repetition passed down from father to son, from grandfather to grandson, from one generation to the next. Patterns of scarcity aren't solely about destitution. They manifest in common phrases like, "That's not for people like us." Money changes people. It's better not to draw attention. Once poor, always poor. These phrases might seem innocuous, but they are invisible chains. They shape decisions, choices, ambitions, and even dreams. Those who grow up hearing them learn to aspire for little, hoping to suffer less. Yet aspiring for little is also a slow way to die on the inside. Becoming your family's first wealthy individual isn't about accumulating figures, it's about embracing a new identity. It's about shedding the mindset of a victim of fate and beginning to think as the author of your own story. And this nearly always begins in silence, when no one believes, when no one applauds, when no one sees any discernible results. It's at this point that many people give up, because they demand proof before making an internal shift. But life only delivers proof after that change has taken root in the mind. First you believe, then the world confirms. This is the invisible order that governs all the great leaps of existence. At the outset of my own journey, I lacked resources, influential contacts, and any semblance of prestige. All I possessed was a persistent restlessness that gnawed at me from within. I lived surrounded by limitations, by meager expectations, by a future already scripted by others. What pained me most wasn't material poverty, but the poverty of perspective. There were days I walked alone, burdened by a weight heavier than myself. A weight composed of fear, doubt, and a question that wouldn't leave me in peace. Was my life already decided before I even tried to change it? There were nights when despair tightened its grip so fiercely that it seemed impossible to carry on. But something within me refused to accept that as my definitive destiny. I didn't yet know how or when or by what path, but I knew I needed to break free from that imposed script. And that internal decision changed everything. It didn't change overnight. It didn't bring immediate money nor swift recognition. First, it brought conflict, because when you change internally, you inevitably unsettle those still trapped in the same patterns. You become an outsider in your own environment. You begin to encounter veiled criticisms, suspicious glances, and ironies disguised as advice. Have you ever experienced this? Felt that when you started to dream bigger, some people began to distance themselves or doubt you? This isn't a sign of error. It's a sign of rupture. The one who becomes their family's first wealthy individual almost always pays with initial solitude. But this solitude isn't abandonment, it's preparation. Because before you can sustain outward prosperity, you must first cultivate inner strength. The mind needs to acclimate to the idea of growth before the body can follow suit. There's a harsh yet liberating truth. No one ascends beyond the image they hold of themselves. You can work hard, save, learn and try, but if internally you still perceive yourself as small, life will find a way to return you to the same place. The world respects the identity you genuinely embody, not the one you pretend to have, but the one you truly believe yourself to be. A family's first wealthy individual is someone who decides in secret that they will live beyond the statistics of their own history. They don't deny their origins. They honor them, but they also refuse to be limited by them. They understand that money isn't merely a means of consumption, it's a tool for life's expansion. With it, one can liberate time, broaden choices, help others, and create opportunities. However, to achieve this, one must dismantle the fears taught as virtues. The fear of making mistakes, the fear of trying, the fear of discussing money, the fear of being judged, the fear of appearing different. The majority of people live trapped by fears they never chose, yet accepted as if they were intrinsic to their character. And here's a truth almost no one speaks aloud. Money doesn't transform anyone, it merely amplifies what's already within. If fear exists, it grows. If courage exists, it also grows. If generosity exists, it multiplies. A family's first wealthy individual doesn't need to be born with extraordinary talent. They need to develop mental discipline to think differently when everything around them thinks the same. They must learn to govern their thoughts before attempting to govern results, because results are merely shadows of what transpires within. The external world is an unforgiving mirror of the internal world. No matter how much you strive, if your mind still walks in circles, you'll always return to the same spot. Lasting prosperity only emerges when one consciously breaks free from the role of survivor and embraces the role of builder. And this demands a kind of courage that doesn't feature in eloquent speeches. It's the courage to change when no one believes, to persist when no one sees, to continue when no one recognizes. The story of every family changes simply because, at some point, one individual decided to be different. This decision creates no fanfare. It doesn't make headlines, but it echoes through entire generations. And it all begins with the simple act of believing that your story can be greater than the statistics handed to you since childhood. True wealth always originates as a silent defiance against the destiny others tried to impose upon you. Once the internal decision is made, the most treacherous phase of the journey begins, when nothing on the outside has yet changed, but everything within is already in turmoil. This is where the majority give up, because the effort starts, but the results are not yet visible. The human mind is impatient by nature. It craves quick proof, immediate signs, external confirmation before it sustains internal discipline. And that's precisely why so many people start full of enthusiasm only to quit a few days later. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to get excited for a brief period and then revert to the same old habits? Have you started something full of hope only to abandon it within the first week? This isn't a weakness of character. It's a lack of command over one's own thoughts. A family's first wealthy individual must win this invisible battle every day, the clash between the desire to grow and the ease of remaining unchanged. Wealth begins to be built when a person learns to do today what will only yield results much later. This is one of the greatest distinctions between those who break a pattern and those who repeat it. One lives for the present, the other builds the future. The majority of people trade years of prosperity for a few minutes of comfort. They work, earn, spend, grow tired, complain, and restart the same cycle. When an opportunity to change arises, so does the fear of losing the little they already possess, and thus people protect scarcity as if it were security. But security isn't about remaining stagnant. Real security is the ability to adapt and grow. The one who becomes their family's first wealthy individual must learn to coexist with uncertainty without panicking. They must learn to invest time where there's no visible return yet. They need to endure the silence of results in the beginning, because prosperity is first built within the invisible structure of the mind before it manifests in the tangible form of money. Now, I want to briefly pause this content for something important. If everything you've heard so far resonates with you, if you feel this message speaks directly to your life, please click like and subscribe to the channel. This simple gesture strengthens our work, allows this content to reach more people, and helps keep alive this mission of transforming mindsets. Sometimes one click changes more lives than one might imagine. Let's return. There's a principle that governs any wealth creation. The mind must be trained like a muscle. No one is born with a prosperous mindset. It is learned. For decades, studies have shown that emotions dominate the decisions of the majority of people, including financial ones. Humans rarely choose based on logic. They choose to alleviate anxiety, fear, frustration, and insecurity. That's why many spend money to ease pain, eat to relieve tension, or give up to escape fear. The first wealthy person in a family needs to learn not to blindly obey their own emotions. They need to feel fear but not succumb to it. They need to feel insecure, but not let that dictate their destiny. Most people's biggest financial blunders don't originate in their wallet. They stem from emotional decisions made during vulnerable moments. How many times has someone vowed to change their life, study more or grow, only to abandon everything after facing criticism? How often has someone decided to save money, but on the first difficult day spent it all just to feel better for a few minutes? Poverty is emotional before it is material, and so is wealth. Let me share an episode from my own journey that still resonates with me today. There was a period when I believed I was making progress, but deep down I was utterly exhausted. I worked hard, but the results were negligible. There were days I felt ashamed even to look people in the eye. I silently questioned whether any of it made sense, or if I was just chasing an illusion. During one of these phases, I received a negative response that hit me like a direct blow. That rejection meant delay, humiliation, doubt, and, most importantly, the terrible feeling of failing myself. For a few days, I almost quit entirely. I felt small, weary, and disheartened. But there was one particular night when something shifted within me. There was no miracle, no unexpected money, no applause. There was just a quiet decision. I would not allow that moment to define my story. That pain didn't paralyze me. It propelled me forward. I transformed frustration into discipline. I turned shame into focused study. I channeled insecurity into consistent action. Not because I was inherently strong, but because I was tired of feeling weak. And it was during that period that seeds were planted that would later completely change my life. At that time, no one saw it. No one believed. But the change was already underway, and that change began within. The first wealthy person in a family goes through this same process. They feel fear like anyone else. They doubt like anyone else. But they do it anyway. They continue even without guarantees. They study when others rest. They save when others spend. They persist when others mock them, not because they are superior, but because they have decided not to betray their own vision. And here is a truth that needs to be stated plainly. The environment you live in might influence your beginning, but it doesn't have the power to determine your end. There are people who were born into homes with no books and went on to build libraries. There are people who grew up surrounded by scarcity and created abundance. There are people who were told their entire lives that they weren't capable and proved the opposite with results. This doesn't happen by chance. It happens because someone at some point decided to break free from inherited beliefs. Becoming the first wealthy person in your family means accepting that you will be the exception, and exceptions always cause discomfort. People feel threatened when someone close to them tries to move beyond what everyone considered immutable. You might hear that you've changed, that you're too ambitious, that you're dreaming too big. But deep down, many of these criticisms stem from others' fear of facing their own limitations. One person's growth always confronts another's stagnation, and that's why this journey demands more than just willpower. It requires mental resilience. It demands clarity of purpose. It demands emotional consistency. The first wealthy person in the family needs to learn to become emotionally stable in the face of unstable results. They need to learn not to get overly excited by small victories, nor to be devastated by minor defeats. Because true prosperity isn't a single leap. It's a continuous build, a daily step, often unseen by hurried eyes. There is a decisive point in this journey where a person stops fighting merely against circumstances and starts fighting against their own old identity. This is the hardest battle of all, because the enemy is no longer external, it's within. It's at this stage that many who have already made some progress end up regressing, not due to a lack of opportunity, but because of excessive internal conflict. The old self-image starts to scream when the new one hasn't yet been firmly established. The person starts to earn some money, change habits, think differently, but inside a silent voice emerges saying, "This isn't for you, you're going too far, you'll lose everything, you don't belong here." And when this voice isn't confronted, it sabotages decisions, causes delays, creates errors, leads to losses and returns the person to their starting point. Have you ever felt this? Have you ever felt fear precisely when things seem to be starting to work out? Have you ever wanted to give up just when you were closest to breaking an old pattern? This is the mind trying to protect the old identity. The brain prefers known pain over the risk of the unknown. That's why becoming the first wealthy person in the family requires not just learning to earn money, but learning to emotionally sustain one's own evolution. Most people don't lose money due to external factors. They lose it because of unresolved internal conflicts. They claim to want to prosper, but they feel guilty when they start to do so. They say they want to grow, but they feel like they're betraying their roots when they begin to grow. This invisible conflict creates invisible roadblocks. For decades, human behaviorists have known that a large portion of our actions don't arise from reason, but from repetition. Humans are driven by habits much more than by intelligence. The mind learns through conditioning, through repeated images, through phrases that become internal truths. If someone grows up hearing that money is suffering, that image becomes a program. If they grow up hearing that rich people are bad, the mind creates automatic resistance to prosperity. And then this same person wonders why they can't progress. They don't realize they are fighting against something implanted within them from an early age. The first wealthy person in the family must inevitably reprogram these conditionings. And this doesn't happen just by reading or listening to something inspiring. It happens through the conscious repetition of new thoughts, new decisions, and new habits, even when everything inside you screams to turn back. Prosperity demands that a person mentally abandons the past before the past physically abandons them. I want to share another episode from my own journey now, one experienced at a completely different time than the one I mentioned earlier. There was a time when I faced a decision that could completely alter my future. Everything in me wanted to move forward, but there was also a profound fear of losing the little I had already achieved. It was as if two opposing forces battled within me every day. For several weeks, I postponed that decision. I analyzed, I reflected, I rationalized, but deep down, I was simply afraid. One night, sitting in silence, I realized something that hit me like a shock. If I backed down at that moment, I might maintain a momentary sense of security, but I would carry the weight of regret for decades. That realization caused something I still remember today with a tremor in my body. It wasn't sadness. It was a fear mixed with clarity. A fear that didn't paralyze me, it pushed me. I moved forward. The result wasn't immediate. There was tension, instability, sleepless nights, doubts once again. But that decision definitively broke something within me. For the first time, I felt I was no longer living to avoid pain, but to build a destiny. That choice was a silent watershed moment, and it wasn't made with euphoria, but with the gravitas of someone who understood that not moving forward is also a form of losing. The first wealthy person in the family goes through this same type of crossroads. At some point, they need to choose between the tranquility of stagnation and the discomfort of growth. They realize that staying the same hurts less now, but destroys more in the future, and moving forward hurts more now, but liberates later. Most choose immediate relief. Few choose lasting freedom. This is where an uncomfortable truth emerges. Prosperity doesn't align with emotional cowardice. It's not about arrogance. It's about responsibility for one's own life. Whoever wishes to change the financial destiny of generations needs the courage to endure the psychological discomfort that this change demands. There's an often unspoken aspect of wealth. It amplifies responsibility. The first wealthy person in the family often feels the weight of being the transitional link between two realities. They feel they are not just playing for themselves, but also for those who came before and those who will come after. This creates pressure. It generates doubts. It causes loneliness. And that's precisely why many retreat when they start to realize they are, in fact, differentiating themselves. They don't want to bear that burden, but someone has to. Every family that knows prosperity today went through a first individual who paid the emotional price of being the exception. I will now mention just one name, and you won't hear it again in this content. A man who lived exactly this internal and external breakthrough, Henry Ford. Before building what he built, he faced bankruptcies, ridicule, and discredit. For a long time, he was seen as someone too stubborn, too much of a dreamer, too reckless. But he held on to his vision when everything seemed to conspire against it. If he had backed down out of fear of others' opinions or attachment to momentary security, history would be different. He wasn't born destined for greatness. He built himself into it. This is the blueprint for all who break through generational limits. And now, for the first and only time in this content, I'm giving you a simple yet profoundly transformative challenge. For the next 7 days, every single day upon waking, write by hand on a sheet of paper a single sentence. I am the person who ends my family's cycle of scarcity. Read this sentence aloud, slowly, looking at this affirmation as if it were already a done deal. It doesn't matter if it currently seems strange, exaggerated, or distant. The brain learns through repetition. Your identity begins to adjust to the image you hold consistently every day. This small daily ritual starts to dislodge old beliefs and open space for a new self-perception. Don't underestimate the power of a consistently held image. Becoming the first wealthy person in your family isn't an isolated event. It's a process of internal transformation that manifests externally over time. Those who overcome this phase come to understand that the greatest barrier was never a lack of opportunity, but the fear of letting go of their old self. It's at this point that a person stops asking life for permission and begins to act like someone who knows they were born for more. And when this change happens internally, the world, sooner or later, is compelled to reorganize itself externally. Once identity begins to shift, another silent test emerges: patience. Few people talk about it, but impatience has destroyed more dreams than a lack of talent. The first wealthy person in the family doesn't just lose due to mistakes. They risk losing due to haste. The mind starts to see possibilities, the heart fills with anticipation, but the world still moves at its old pace. It's in this gap between vision and reward that many break down emotionally. One begins to think, I'm doing everything right, so why hasn't the money arrived as I expected? Why do I still feel afraid? Why do I still stumble? And here lies a dangerous trap, confusing process with failure. True growth hurts because it demands time, and time, when misunderstood, turns into an enemy. It is precisely at this stage that comparisons arise. One starts to measure themselves against the results of others. They look at those who prospered faster, who advanced sooner, who seem to be doing better. This comparison poisons the mind. It generates shame, urgency, anxiety, and hasty decisions. No one builds solid wealth by competing against others' clocks. Each story has its invisible rhythm. The first wealthy person in the family needs to learn to respect their own timing, even when everything within them wants to skip steps. There's also a silent kind of pain that accompanies those who begin to prosper. Guilt. Guilt for being better off when others are not. Guilt for wanting more than your environment ever allowed. Guilt for breaking away from the circumstances where everyone else remained. This guilt doesn't stem from malice. It arises from the emotional bond with one's own origins. The problem is that if one doesn't learn to deal with this guilt, they subconsciously self-sabotage to alleviate this burden. They lose opportunities, make poor decisions, mismanage what they earn, enter into businesses they don't understand, all to unconsciously return to the same level as their surroundings. It's as if the mind says, this is where you belong. To prosper requires learning to prosper without apologizing for it. It's not about despising your roots, but about honoring them through evolution. The true tribute to family isn't to repeat suffering, but to end it. Many years ago, I went through a period where this guilt nearly cost me everything. I had advanced beyond what I myself had imagined possible. Some doors opened, new responsibilities arose, new decisions needed to be made. But in silence, I began to feel displaced. It was as if I no longer fully belonged to the old world, but also didn't yet feel worthy of the new. This in-between space is emotionally exhausting. In certain encounters, I noticed different looks. In certain conversations, uncomfortable silences. I felt that my own change was creating an invisible distance between me and people I loved. There was one specific day when, returning from a difficult conversation, I walked alone for a long time, with a tightness in my chest that felt physical. For an instant, the idea crossed my mind to retreat, to simplify everything, to go back to who I was before, just to restore that feeling of belonging. That hurt me deeply. But on that very day, I understood something that changed my outlook forever. I wasn't moving away from people. I was simply changing my role within my own story. I hadn't been called to repeat the same old role. I had been called to open a new door. When I understood that, the guilt lost its power. The pain didn't disappear immediately, but it gained meaning. And pain with meaning transforms into maturity. The first wealthy person in the family needs to learn to endure this type of emotional discomfort without self-destructing. They need to understand that growth also demands letting go of certain old versions of themselves, and even some relationships that only exist as long as everything stays the same. This is hard to accept, but inevitable. You don't change the financial destiny of entire generations without altering the emotional structures that uphold that destiny. The mind needs to become broader than the environment in which it was born. It has been known for decades that people make financial decisions driven far more by fear and immediate desire than by logic. This explains why so many people spend when they're sad, invest poorly when they're euphoric, and freeze when they're afraid. The first wealthy person in the family needs to learn not to make decisions during an emotional storm. They learn to let their mind cool down before acting. They learn to say no to themselves. They learn that every short-term sacrifice strengthens long-term freedom. This maturity isn't innate. It's built with every observed mistake, every contained impulse, every conscious choice. There comes a moment when a person realizes they are no longer just trying to survive better, but trying to build something that has never existed before in their own family history. This moment is both heavy and grand. Heavy because it carries responsibility. Grand because it carries purpose, and purpose is the strongest fuel there is for discipline. When someone knows why they do something, they can endure almost any how. The first wealthy person in the family isn't driven solely by money. They are driven by the meaning of being the transition between scarcity and possibility. They are driven by the desire to change the narrative for those who will come after them. They are driven by a vision that not everyone can yet see. A point comes when the mind begins to stabilize at this new frequency. Guilt diminishes, fear lessens, comparison loses its grip. One begins to feel that they are finally occupying their rightful place in the world. Not an inherited place, but a conquered one. And when this happens, something definitively changes in how they view money, work, opportunities, and life itself. The first wealthy person in the family stops feeling like an intruder in prosperity and begins to feel like a legitimate builder of it. And this internal shift prepares the ground for the most decisive phase of all, when the mind is ready to sustain what once seemed only a distant dream. There comes a moment when a person realizes something that completely changes their relationship with destiny. They understand they are no longer just trying to escape scarcity, but learning to sustain prosperity. This point is rare because most people dream of getting out of hardship, but almost no one emotionally prepares to remain in growth. The first wealthy person in the family needs to develop a new kind of strength, the ability to keep their mind elevated when circumstances begin to improve. Because it's at this stage that new, silent dangers emerge. The pride that blinds, the euphoria that leads to thoughtless spending, the haste that pushes one into decisions that are too big, too soon, the illusory feeling that nothing can go wrong now. Many fall precisely here, not due to a lack of opportunity, but due to overconfidence without structure. Prosperity without discipline turns into instability. Growth without balance turns into a fall. There's a phase in life where a person stops fighting to climb and starts fighting not to fall. This is a completely different kind of struggle. Here, the enemy is no longer external scarcity, but internal neglect. The first wealthy person in the family needs to learn to protect what they achieve with the same intensity with which they fought to achieve it. They understand that money isn't just something to be earned, it's something to be managed, preserved, and consciously multiplied. They learn that it's not enough to win once. One must win every day against their own impulses, against complacency, against the deceptive idea that enough has been done. The mind that builds is the same one that needs to sustain, and sustaining requires constancy, humility, and inner vigilance. There's also a profound test at this stage, the test of meaning. At some point, one looks at what they've achieved and silently asks, is this all there is? If money isn't tied to a greater purpose, it quickly loses its power to motivate. The first wealthy person in the family discovers that wealth only becomes truly powerful when it serves something beyond their own ego. When it begins to free up time, heal fears, generate dignity, create choices, protect those who came before, and open paths for those who will come after. It's at this point that prosperity ceases to be merely financial and becomes existential. People no longer work just to have more, but to be more, and to enable others to be more as well. I'll conclude with a final reflection from my own journey, experienced at a stage when much had already changed externally. I was faced with a result that years earlier would have seemed impossible. But strangely, in that instant, I felt no euphoria. I felt something far deeper, responsibility. I understood that what I had quietly dreamed of no longer belonged solely to me. It also belonged to the people who would be touched by this outcome, directly or indirectly. There was an instant of contained emotion, almost a lump in my throat, not of explosive joy, but of profound awareness. Awareness that anything born solely for oneself ultimately fades away, and everything that aligns with a greater purpose grows beyond its own lifespan. On that day, I definitively understood that true wealth isn't about how much you accumulate, but how much you become capable of sustaining without losing yourself. The first wealthy person in a family is one who learns to balance three forces that rarely coexist: ambition, discipline, and humility. Ambition to get started, discipline to stay on course, humility to avoid straying when you reach higher levels. He understands that each growth cycle will bring new fears, new responsibilities, and new choices, and he doesn't delude himself into thinking that one day everything will become easy. He simply becomes stronger, more stable, and more aware with each step. And here's a truth worth more than any monetary value. Becoming the first wealthy person in your family isn't merely about financial gain. It's about enriching history. It's about breaking the cycle of scarcity. It's about proving through action that destiny can be rewritten. It's about demonstrating, without grand speeches, that a new reality is possible. It's about creating a dividing line between the before and after for entire generations. Perhaps you've reached this point with doubts, fears, and even disbelief. That's natural. Every leap begins with a restless heart. But one thing is certain: someone at some point in your lineage would need to be the first to dare. The question echoing now isn't about money, it's about identity. Who do you decide to be from this moment on? Before we move on, I want you to pause for one instant and think of just one person. One person whom you know deep down carries more potential than life has allowed them to see so far. Someone who struggles in silence, who carries doubts, fears, responsibilities, and perhaps even the feeling that they were born in a place where dreams must remain small to avoid too much pain. Now, imagine the impact a single idea can have when it lands in the right mind at the right moment. Sometimes one message changes more than years of repeated suffering. If this content resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with that special person, not as someone imposing a truth, but as someone extending a bridge. Because no one becomes great alone, and often the first step of a transformation begins when someone believes in us before we do ourselves. I'll be here, walking with you, because this journey still holds insights that can change everything. I'll see you in the next video.